Hello, everyone. This is Margaret Manning with 60 and Me. This is the place where women over 60 come to be inspired. In our always on, always connected world, women don't often get a chance to settle down and relax and, really reflect on their lives. And my guest tonight is Susan Piver. Susan is a meditation teacher, but she is also an award-winning New York Times best-selling author of 7 books. And in 2011, she founded an Open Heart Project, which is for people who want to learn meditation. She wants to teach anyone who wants to learn. So Susan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm very happy to have you. And the reason that I started by calling you a meditation teacher is that I think that that's what you do from how I see your life. So I hope that's the right way to start.
Yes, that's great. That totally works for me.
Okay. So in order to give the people in the community, I'm sure you're a little bit aware of that we have 35,000 women in this community, 60 and Me, over 60. So lots of reflection on our lives and thinking about, where the future's leading. Tell us a bit about you. And if you can, describe yourself in 6 words and see how that can relate to your role as an author and a teacher.
Okay. Well, I am an author and a teacher, like you say, and a Buddhist meditation teacher. And the 6 words I would come up with, I would say, first, introverted, intense, engaged, like really trying to just be here, be alive, and connect with the good, the bad, and the ugly. Curious, I would say, maybe is my number one quality. I would have to say confused is always there, very confused at many points in time, which I'm curious about. And I would guess the last word would be clear. I try to be very clear in my own communications and in my thoughts.
Yes.
And in my relationships, which doesn't mean aggressively honest. It just means understanding the meaning. Mm-hmm. That's what I would say.
Those are fabulous words. And what I love about them actually is that they very much align to your rules of life, which I know I read in one of your books, which are beautiful guidance. And really, that's where I wanted to take this interview with you. I want to see if we can get some practical ideas out there for women in the community as to how they can, make changes in their lives, small things to really take on some of those attributes that you just talked about, curiosity and the willingness to take the good and the bad. So when you started meditating, and I know that was some time ago, what was your motivation? What were your values that were driving, your own personal desire to perfect meditation?
Well, I wasn't so much interested in meditation as I was in Buddhism. Mm-hmm. Because when I started reading about Buddhism, especially this one particular style, I felt this great sense of relief and ease, because I remember reading this book and thinking, finally, someone's making sense here. This makes sense. This speaks to me. This I understand. This I am curious about. I must be a Buddhist. I didn't know that's what it was called.
And Buddhists meditate, so
yeah, Buddhists meditate, and a big part of this particular book and many styles of Buddhism are very focused on practice.
Yes.
Other styles are more focused on study. Both are focused on both practice and study, yes. But some put a little more emphasis on one over the other, and this happened to be more emphasis on practice.
Right.
So I was like, well, I guess I have to learn to meditate.
So in terms of, practice, I love that word because I think it applies to just every aspect of our life. If we can see it through that lens, it's actually quite helpful. But it might be useful for the community if you could just tell us in a couple of sentences or a few words what Buddhism really is about, what the precepts are, because I think that as a foundation for the meditation that you teach, it's important. So can you share that with us?
Sure. Yeah, it's of course impossible in a few words,
of course,
or a few minutes. It would take lifetimes. But I think what's important to note for anyone who's considering a meditation practice or is curious about mindfulness, the first thing I would say to know about Buddhism is that it is non-theistic,
right.
Meaning there is no central deity that you must believe in who will then give you things if you act right. And you can have a religious beliefs of any kind and still practice meditation.
Right.
You can learn about Buddhism, you can learn about compassion, those things are not connected to a belief system. They just are interesting philosophy, maybe would be the best word to use. So it's non-theistic, which sets it apart almost immediately from Judeo-Christian traditions. And yeah, there are precepts that they're truths that it is founded upon, the Four Noble Truths. And they're very complex and multi-layered.
Yes.
And we were talking earlier about attachment, and the first noble truth is that life is suffering. But that doesn't mean life is a bummer. It means everything changes and there's nothing to hold on to. And that's very difficult and painful for us. So, but it's just a fact. You can't help but notice that anything you tried to hold on to, including your own body, eventually just disappears, changes. And then the second noble truth is that grasping is the cause of suffering. In other words, wanting things to stay the same. But grasping is I would say, a very misunderstood notion. And the notion of attachment, sometimes I hear people say, I've gotten upset before in conversations with people who say, oh, why are you so attached? You shouldn't be so attached. And I always feel like that's a kind of a slight, like I shouldn't have the feelings that I have. It doesn't mean not caring. It doesn't mean being blasé. It doesn't mean being imperturbable. It actually means feeling everything and coming back to balance at some point. Because if we're always trying to hold off the things that we don't want and hold on to the things that we do want, those are both forms of grasping.
Yes.
And if we release both, which requires a lot of practice, suffering diminishes.
I want you to continue with the next two because it's very important. But in terms of that, which is really interesting, is I was talking to somebody about happiness. And we're talking about happiness. In fact, there's a very good TED talk by Monsieur Ricard. He was a Buddhist teacher on this. He says, he's amazing. He said that, happiness is really well-being, and it's the combination of good and bad. It's like not the negation of one or the other, but that happiness, which is what we all crave, is the combination of those two things, suffering and joy. So you've got
that's wonderful.
It's amazing.
Brilliant teacher.
Yeah. So you've got life is suffering, and that attachment or this grasping is what creates our unhappiness. And the third was?
Karma is real. The seeds that you plant now will bear fruit later.
Right.
And of course, we're all familiar with the notion of karma, and karma's a bitch, and what goes around comes around. That's all true. However, in the Buddhist view, which includes the notion of lifetimes, the seeds that may be coming to fruition right now may have been planted in other lives.
Yes.
And the good seeds that you're planting now, many people have the experience of being wonderful and doing wonderful things and having painful things happen. But if you look at the karmic chain as happening over many, many lifetimes, it starts to make a little more sense. Things are playing out that we can't see and will resolve at a time where we cannot be aware of right now. So nonetheless, the notion of planting good seeds is always, and the best seed is what Mathieu Ricard is talking about, happiness, or you could call it contentment.
Yes.
Contentment with what is, which doesn't mean feeling like, oh, I have cancer, that's fine, no problem. That's not what contentment means.
Yes.
It means turning towards your experience and embracing it and working with it, including what makes you feel terrible and what makes you feel wonderful and what makes you feel bored and so on.
It's gratitude.
Gratitude is always good.
Yeah. And then the fourth is of course the way that you live your life, correct? I mean, the different steps that you can take. So let's talk about a practical application of this, because I think it's really important. And I know you've written a a book on this topic, The Wisdom of the Broken Heart, I believe it's called. And, if that is true in Buddhism, that suffering is caused by attachment, and women in our age group are, have been through a lot in their lives, 6 decades of, of love and disappointment. They loved and lost. And, how can meditation, or this process of meditation, help them to overcome sadness and loss? And I think, as you say, find wisdom, in that.
Well, I can't say anything about overcoming it, but I can say that if you turn towards what you feel rather than away from it, there's an opportunity to gain wisdom. But if you're always turning away, that opportunity to learn from it or find wisdom in it is lessened. And I would even say that the turning towards is the wisdom. Mm-hmm. Less that you're going to find a message in your suffering. Although, it's good to analyze our situation and be very cognizant and conscious about our experience. But turning towards what you feel is the source of power. Turning away from it is a source of diminishment. And when your heart is broken, you have no choice, because whatever you do, you can't get away from it.
Yeah.
So you have to look at it. And I don't mean from a psychological point of view. I mean from a emotional or spiritual point of view. If you feel your own heart, you automatically connect with your own wisdom. And nobody should take my word for that. You should try it and see.
So how does meditation, the practice of sitting and breathing, which I hope you can talk about with us in a minute, how can that help with that, with loss and with connecting with your heart?
Well, it teaches you how to sit with what is. And when things arise to distract you from what is, you let go and you come back to the object of attention, which in the case of this meditation is the breath, which is a stand-in for the present moment. So that when you get off your meditation cushion and you're trying to pay attention to what's happening around you and things distract you, like, why did they say that to me? Or this is never going to work out. Or this is the big one. Everything's going to be great now. Those are all distractions. And when you learn to let go of such thoughts on the cushion, the chance to let go of them off the cushion is greatly increased. So meditation teaches you how to sit with discomfort, sit with boredom, sit with genius, sit with sorrow, sit with confusion. And this is a very practical skill. So in this sense, when our emotions, when something very painful happens, it gives us the tools to meet it with strength, rather than trying to escape from it in a cowardly way.
Yeah, I think that's really, really helpful to think about it in terms of, and practical, of meditation being the place that you learn the skill, you build the muscle to then go into the real world, which is not so protected and comfortable. And
there is no protection.
Yeah.
And we can try to build protection in all sorts of ways. But that is not I would say that is not the definition of warriorship. A warrior is not one who has built a good fortress. A warrior is one who is agreeing to step out into the world unprotected. Otherwise, what else could courage be?
Yeah. You talk about, at the very beginning, your first word I think that you described yourself with was introvert. And I was going to tie that back to a question about anxiety and about the fact that I think you mentioned it was a great conversation you had with Jesse Jacobs at the Samovar Tea Lounge. And you actually said to him that was one of your challenges, was your anxiety when flying. I'm with you on that, by the way. I do not like flying. But And whatever the anxiety is that you have, whatever you're afraid of, how can meditation help you to be strong?
Well, I want to be clear that meditation is not a panacea for everything. And especially when it comes to traumatic reactions, trying to live with being traumatized.
Right.
That's a different category. And And if someone has panic attacks like I have had, and I would never say to that person, oh, just meditate through it, because that's not possible. But when the panic attack has passed, the ability to sort of examine it and walk back to it and re-feel it with a sense of kind of strength and curiosity. Curiosity and strength are synonyms, by the way, is greatly increased. But when you don't have a sense of mindfulness or willingness to look, then you just start avoiding things that might trigger you. And of course, everybody should be intelligent and know their triggers and take care of themselves. But trying to hide only goes so far.
You know, I absolutely agree with you on that, and I'm glad you mentioned actually that meditation is not a panacea, because I'm hoping in the course of this conversation that other women in the community will get interested in meditation. And I know you've got some wonderful programs and free ways for them to engage with meditation. So I don't want them to feel that we're saying that meditation will solve all of your problems. But what I think for me it's done is given me time to be self-aware. Which is what you said,
Which is the root of problem solving.
Yeah. And I think that, and so there's a question I was going to ask you about this self-awareness, and it's related to, I guess, authenticity and, the challenge that women face in being a bit cynical about the lives that they've lived, that they've been authentic, they've tried their best, and things just have happened, I was actually just trying to understand like the dynamic of your mental state, how that affects, how things happen in your life. So you can say, I've been an authentic person, I've been a good person, I've done all of these things, and still my life has not changed. Like an example is, I put a post on Huffington Post recently about losing a partner. And the question was, how do you help a woman who's lost her partner, her husband or her friend? And the answers that I got in the community were split right down the middle between, I never got over it, it's 10 years, and every day I live in that shadow. And then the other half was, well, I just decided I couldn't sleep at night, so I'd go out and plant in the garden. And then I'd go back to school and I'd get my degree. And then I would, and it was just like different ways of, and the question was, does meditation help you to stop worrying about the bad and the negatives and find constructive ways to be authentic in your life, to do what's right for you? Because grieving for 10 years might be right for you. I mean, it could be in some situations what that person had to do.
It's just what's happening. Yeah,
exactly. I'm not being critical, but how can meditation, or maybe I shouldn't ask meditation, the practice. How does the practice of self-awareness help with that duality?
Well, first, I mean, it helps you see what you're feeling, and what we're feeling may be devastating. And I mean, I wrote a book about heartbreak because I had a heartbreak. I know it's real. It's not like, oh, if I could just look at it from a different way, pain wouldn't hurt. Pain hurts. But that actually is not the part that creates the deep injury. This is my opinion. What creates the deep injury is the story that we tell ourselves about what the pain means.
Yes. Yeah. That's a good way of putting it.
Meditation helps you distinguish between the feeling and the story. And the ultimate advice comes from the American Buddhist nun Pema Chodron, who said, and I'm paraphrasing, but when it comes to emotional pain, feel the feeling and drop the story. And that is the pith instruction of all time. And the story is what makes us bitter. The story is what keeps us stuck. The story is what makes us think, well, if I just get busy, I won't have to feel this. Yeah, you should get busy, and everybody should be constructive and try whatever you want to try. But focus on the feeling and not the story. And by the feeling, I mean in your body. That's a great place to start. When you're feeling heartbroken or grief-stricken, where is it? Is it in your heart? Is it in your shoulders? Is it in your stomach? Does it make you go like this? Does it make you go like this? It's somatic somehow. Connect with that rather than if only I hadn't said this or done that or been older or been younger or been fatter or been skinnier or showed up at this date or not worn pink or, those kinds of things are very distracting.
So that's where the journey starts, to reinventing yourself. And so we've talked a lot about the theory of meditation. Tell us about the Open Heart Project and how women can get involved. Well, women and men, anyone can get involved in your project. It's a beautiful initiative. I myself get your mails every few days and follow meditation with you. I think it's great. And
Thanks.
Your website, by the way, is beautiful.
Thank you.
I highly recommend people just go to susanpiver.com and check it out. It's great.
It is great.
Yeah, I love it. But tell us about the Open Heart Project.
Okay. As a meditation teacher, I can only teach so many people in person. But I teach workshops all over the world. And I would say to people at the end of the workshop, well, if you want to keep meditating, please do. And please find a meditation center. So, find a community that can support you in your practice, because that's very important. 80% of the people would be like, what meditation center is that in Utah or Bosnia or Bolivia or wherever they live?
Yes.
And I thought, well, maybe, in the meantime, until there are meditation centers in all those places, I'll send out a 10-minute meditation video twice a week, Monday and Thursday, to anyone who wants it, just as a support stopgap. Like it looks like this every day. It's a different meditation and a little talk, and there's almost 12,000 subscribers now. There are people all over the world meditating together, and people started asking questions like, "What do I do if my foot falls asleep?" Or every time I sit down to meditate, I just start sobbing. Is that okay? The people have questions, of course, about the practice. So I started adding a little bit of information to each video, just like a minute or two or three before the sit. You may be thinking about sadness. You may be thinking about anxiety. You may be thinking about physical pain. Here's some insight that maybe would be helpful. Okay, now let's meditate.
Right. And actually, I do like that you do take a topic every day that is a little bit unexpected. Like it's not like you sit down and there's this kind of thinking that meditation is just a blissful sitting quietly and breathing, but you bring into it real life. So I think that's...
And the most important thing that for everyone to realize is that meditation does not mean that you have to stop thinking.
Yes.
Doesn't mean that you're supposed to clear the mind of thought or be calm even. You can be freaked out and anxious and still meditate. It's a matter of showing up with yourself as you are. And that includes everything.
Well, I think this is a great offer to the world. And I think that, I think you said to Jessie that you'd like everyone in the world meditating. And I'm fairly ambitious.
Yeah, well, I should have put ambitious on my list.
But you have been the embodiment of all the words that you described yourself with. I loved it. I really did. Nice. And I guess in closing, I'd just like to ask you, you've got maybe 35,000 women hopefully watching this at some point in the next, few days and years. What would you say to them? What's their advice in terms of reinventing themselves after 60 and perhaps taking up the practice of meditation?
Don't be afraid of yourself. Is the best advice. Don't be afraid of yourself. And meditation really teaches you that courage.
Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate your time. Thanks.